been a long time since it was true, so long even I barely remember. But you used to need at least 2 TV listings magazines a week. Either that or a daily newspaper, and that would have been rudimentary at best. The BBC-produced Radio Times had details of their 2 channels and the radio. For ITV, commercial radio when it arrived, and after 1982 Channel 4, you turned to TV Times. And at Christmas, they had a plump festive issue just like the Radio Times. It may not be as iconic, but there was a time it was just as important. First, a little history. TV Times was launched with the ITV network in 1955 by a subsidiary company set up for that exact purpose by its first franchise holders, Associated Rediffusion. All of the first 4 ITV companies agreed to have their programmes listed in their own local versions of Rediffusion's paper, as did, when they were formed, Border, Anglia, Grampian and Southern. But it wasn't a rule or anything, yet. And most of the other regions had their own ITV listings magazines, produced by or under licence from their local ITV companies. There was TV Weekly in Wales, The Viewer, which served the Tyne Tees region and later took over from TV Guide in STV land. Even my region had one, Look Westward. Eventually, ATV and ABC realised that if Westward and Channel could have their own listings magazines, there was no reason for big shots like them to be chained to Rediffusion styles, and broke away from TV Times to form TV World. Altogether, at peak, there were 7 ITV listings magazines in the nation, TV Times included. And this eventually got on ITA chairman Lord Hill's wick so much that at the 1967 franchise round, he effectively murdered 5 of them in one stroke. He commanded all the ITV companies to form a new, jointly owned company that would buy the TV Times and turn it into a listings magazine for all the regions in the network. He made a single exception for Channel, who got to keep their local magazine, which they created in-house, because those guys needed all the potential sources of income they could get. And so, from September 1968, the TV Times went national for the first time, where it remains today, although the deregulation and breakup of the old ITV network, not to mention the same thing happening to the TV listings magazine industry as a whole, means it has basically nothing to do with ITV itself anymore. In fact, these days it's published by Time Incorporated, of all people. So that's the secret origin of TV Times. Let's go back to the start and the very first ITV Christmas in London, the Midlands and the North. Well, that's a bad start. Evidence of the 1955 Christmas TV Times is elusive, and I don't just mean the cover. The only thing I've managed to find to suggest it existed at all is basic logic, in that the magazine started that September, so there surely must have been an issue that week. But it's like it's been deleted from history. Did it have Jimmy Savile on the cover or what? But the week immediately before it depicted a baffled Bob Hope, so there's that. Alright, apart from that, we've got a complete collection. So let's highest to 1956 and let this charming photo of what I assume is a typical 50s Christmas, all paper chains, chintz curtains, and cards piled on a huge wooden box with a tiny window studded into it, which made up a TV in those days. Everything's red because, as you'll recall, ink was at a premium for getting on 20 years after the war, and red was the only colour to which the likes of TV Times had access. The Christmas week TV Times in 1957 was dominated by a huge glamour shot of the still relatively novel Mrs. Queen. Her speech that year was the first to be properly televised, after the previous 5 were broadcast in sound only, presumably over a photo of her face, or a flag, or a big picture of a forelock with the occasional caption reading "Tug Now." 1958's Christmas TV Times sported an original John Leech illustration from Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. This apparently tied in with a musical version showing on Christmas Eve under the title The Merry Christmas. And this seems to have been a remake of something Rediffusion had made 3 years earlier for ITV's first Christmas. That version seems to have starred Satan-proud Hugh Griffith as Scrooge and Martin Lawrence, as all three ghosts, composited into a single character simply called the Spirit of Christmas, for the sake of making the story fit 45 minutes. Don't know who was in the 1958 version, although reports suggest Stephen Murray was their Scrooge. The author's granddaughter, Monica Dickens, is on hand to give her opinion in the TV Times. Also in this issue, a message from Geoffrey Fisher, the Archbishop, more forelock tugging, some words from Walt Disney, and some pages where the TV Times can pretend to be the people's friend. 1959's Christmas TV Times was the first example of what would become the magazine's most familiar pattern: the TV stars in Christmassy arrangement. Of course, nearly 60 years on, most of these then household names just look like random people to anyone not a student of 50s television. I will concede that most people will recognise Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound, and some might be able to stretch to Bootsy and Snudge. Into the 60s, with ABC Television's big Christmas presentation. With Christmas falling on a Sunday, it was the weekend franchisee stamping ground that year. Alice Through the Looking Box. Some kind of modern updating of Lewis Carroll, I expect. This was insanely ambitious for a weekend station in 1960, and seems like it might well have been really good, or at the very least a fascinating disaster. Sadly, we'll never know either way, because if it was ever recorded at all, it's long since lost. All we have to go on is the promotional photo for the TV Times cover, which depicts Jeannie Carson looking understandably wary at the prospect of a TV-themed tea party with Mad Hatter Ron Moody and March Hare Bernard Bresslaw, an actor who needed the added height of the rabbit ears much less than, say, Ronnie Corbett, the Dormouse. It was quite the all-star cast, in fact. Bob Monkhouse was the Cheshire Cat, Dora Bryan was the Queen of Hearts, Fanny Craddock showed up, Ian Hendry in his police surgeon character, Joan Sims, Marty Wilde, Bernie and Mike Winters were Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They even had the mighty Donald Pleasance as the stoned caterpillar. And there were 2 whole goons. Peter Sellers was busy with his movie career, but we still got Spike Milligan as the White Rabbit, and Harry Secombe was Humpty Dumpty, making his first of several appearances on the TV Times Christmas cover. See? 1961, Secombe had the entire cover to himself, dressed as a plump Welsh Santa, putting a faintly psychotic expression. To be fair, the Mogul-eyed grin was his trademark, but it could often verge on the unsettling, or in cases like this, go right over the verge into the realms of absurdist horror. At least it wasn't a 2-week issue in those days. Featuring a special pull-out section about Coronation Street, which started the previous December and took ITV rather by surprise by outliving its initial 13-week commission. 1962's Christmas TV Times, which came after a change of logo, eschewed such secular concerns as big photos of stars, even such non-secular stars as Harry Secombe, and kicked off a run of Christmas issues adorned with cute kiddywinks. 1962 had a pious photo of some choir boys with mouths wide in praise of the Lord. Either that or they're yawning. The following year was almost a mirror image, with a pious little girl facing a red stripe on the other side. Big difference, of course, was that full colour was finally back. No more line drawings in shades of red. Another adorable little girl in 1964 justified by a charity tie-in with the NSPCC and Pat Phoenix. Fair enough. Then in 1965, beneath a new masthead logo, they used a painting by Florence Kroger of the boy Jesus, who apparently had a mullet 2 decades before it was invented. Truly he is the Son of God. This one's about as religious as the TV Times ever got at Christmas. In 1966, beneath a reverently blinged out logo, the cover star was Miss Lady Queen again. There's nothing particularly special about the speech this year that called for it, it's just the Queen. 1967 was TV Times' last Christmas under the old format before all the regions were commanded to share it. It was also the last time the Christmas cover would be a vaguely religious photograph. From now until the 90s, there'd always be images related to something or someone that was on over the season. Although technically, so is this, because this is a church that was to play host to the televised Christmas morning service. In 1968, of course, it was all changed as the TV Times went fully national for the first time. That year's Christmas cover stars were the actress Julia Foster and not Ben Fogle, because he wouldn't be born for another 6 years. That's his big sister, Emily. Although the copy on the cover seems to suggest that Foster hasn't come up with a name for her yet and is just referring to her as Baby. That's just how we talked in those days. Christmas 1969 saw the first Christmas and New Year double issue, with both the radio and the TV Times. The latter sported perhaps the most Christmassy design they'd had yet, all glitter and ribbons and wrapping paper, dominated by Des O'Connor giving a disturbingly predatory stare from behind a pasted-on tashless Amish Santa beard. This set the template for TV Times' long-term Christmas future as the 70s rolled around. Christmas 1970 saw a lovely masthead, multiple Santas, a robin, a snowman, a sprig of holly, and of course, snow on the logo. But the accompanying full-page picture was a rather less seasonal snap of Val Doonican and Max Bygraves splitting the difference between mohair and polyester. They could at least have dressed in Father Christmas outfits or pretended to have a snowball fight or something. See, Barbara Murray knows what she's doing. Who Killed Santa Claus was a play under the ITV Saturday Night Theatre strand. Despite getting what amounts to top billing on the cover of the TV Times, it didn't even run on Christmas Day, it being a Friday, showing on Boxing Day instead. It doesn't say a lot for ITV's Christmas lineup that year. But like I say, at least they managed to do a Christmassy photo of their cover star. It's not too much to ask, is it? A bit of dressing up. Oh, sod off. Well, it's less offensive than Love Thy Neighbour. This presumably is promoting the fourth and last Carry On Christmas, which was also one of the last Carry On projects that Sir Sid James worked on. He played a department store Santa in a framing story for a set of sketches that start out halfway decent and get worse. And it doesn't even have Hattie Jakes in it. Miniature Father Christmas flying through the logo makes his third consecutive appearance, and he'll be back on and off for several more years yet, as will the official Christmas on ITV logo, as seen on network trailers usually put together by Granada, or occasionally ATV. Let's end this run of faintly troubling Christmas TV Times with Tommy Steele in a jerkin reading Danish fairy tales to a group of Aryan children on the set of George Lucas's THX 1138. Meanwhile, Tiny Santa is having a little sit down. He's absent altogether in 1975, so the cover is adorned by a lovely, if not especially Christmassy, cartoon of various ITV stars in a hot air balloon piloted by Sooty on an unseasonably sunny day. Artist unknown, but whoever it was a pretty impressive caricaturist. I especially enjoy how they've captured Les Dawson's comic persona in a handful of Hergé-style clear lines. That's probably the expression I'd have if I found myself in a hot air balloon piloted by a puppet bear. Father Christmas is back on the logo in 1976 as the Galaxy of Stars format returns, this time in photographic form. It's not as aesthetically appealing as the previous years, but it is Christmas year. And the overspill implying that ITV's Christmas schedule has just too much talent to fit on the cover is a nice touch. It might help if everyone were looking at the camera instead of casting sidelong glances at each other or gazing into the middle distance like Pat Phoenix. But that's the danger of using old photos and yoo-hooing them onto Santa costumes. Very much the 1970s equivalent of Photoshop. For Christmas 1977, TV Times fought against Punk's Year Zero with a resolutely square tableau of George and Mildred, i.e. Brian Murphy and Luther Joyce, out carolling with a baffled Secombe, making his third Christmas TV Times appearance, having been surprisingly absent from the previous year's grid, and a tiny Bonnie Langford, Not that there's any other kind. In 1978, of course, Thames pulled off a genuine coup in prizing Morecambe and Wise from the BBC, although unfortunately not their head writer. Naturally, when their usual stamping ground of Christmas came along, TV Times wasn't going to pass it up, although they apparently weren't going to go to any more effort than usual either, and simply had the boys in Santa suits with a cutout of Sean Connery in a white void. The Radio Times would at least have had them in tuxedos posing against some kind of tunnel effect. Oh well, Father Christmas makes his final appearance in the masthead, which would have changed to the more familiar TV Times logo in a couple of years, in which he wouldn't fit anyway. 1979's Christmas TV Times wasn't the most pleasant thing to look at over 2 weeks, despite the cover star being the extremely aesthetically pleasing Faye Dunaway. Well, she was then, anyway. Don't know what she was in over the Christmas period, but whatever it was deserved better than this unpleasant and unchristmassy shade of lime green. Also starring the Muppets, Morecambe and Wise again, this time as disturbing proto-spitting image caricatures, and Captain Cremant flanked by Carla, whose inclusion I'm sure made the average teenage boy very happy that this was a double issue. Into the 80s, and the first Christmas TV Times of the decade was one of the best ever. It's Morecambe and Wise in Santa suits alongside Bond again, but this time the Bond is Roger Moore, and he's actually here. Also, there's a proper set. Okay, so the sea resort is blatantly a photographic backdrop, but what do you want, jam on it? Also present, Janet Brown as Mrs. Thatcher. In 1981, TV Times adopted their famous square logo, which they're still effectively using to this day, albeit with a touch of evolution. They also gained the word magazine in the name, but that didn't last. Unfortunately, the iconic logo's first Christmas wasn't the best one it ever had. The colours rotated in those days, apparently through Strongbad's method of colour wheel roulette.
No whammies, no whammies! Oh, ouch, man.
And unfortunately for the Christmas issue, the wheels stopped at roughly the same shade of lime green as in the background in 1979, combined with a darker green and a slightly burnt orange, which somehow managed to subliminally replicate the image of bile splashing around ominously in your stomach after a bout of overindulgence. In that respect, it was probably quite apt. The photo wasn't the best they'd ever used either. Another eerie shot of Harry Secombe giving his serial killer smile from inside a Santa suit. This time they didn't give him a beard. Now that's more like it. For TV Time's first Christmas with Channel 4 alongside ITV, they hired the great Arthur Ranson, best known for his work in Look It, the ITV kids magazine billed as the Junior TV Times and made on the ground floor of the same building. Or if you're me, best known for the Doctor Who comic Fellow Travellers, with which he became the first person in Doctor Who magazine to actually draw a recognisable likeness of Sylvester McCoy, with the greatest of respect on John Ridgway. I don't know the draftsperson behind 1983's Christmas TV Times. It might be Arthur Ranson again, just possibly. If so, he didn't bring his A game, because whoever it was turned out an eerie, disproportionate depiction of the Waleses, apparently in a parallel universe where they're a middle-class family of achondroplastic dwarves living in the suburbs of Welwyn Garden City. 1984's Christmas TV Times was graced by Russ Abbott, in character as C.U. Jimmy, also in character as a fairy godmother. Russ's Madhouse was still going strong on ITV, but despite his popularity, they never put him on Christmas Day itself, although he did get a Hogmanay episode on New Year's Eve 1982. In 1986 he moved to the BBC, who gave him pride of place on the big day for 4 years in a row. The writing was on the wall when he was moved to Boxing Day in 1990, and he eventually went back to ITV until his career finally became untenable even for Carlton Television in the mid-90s. The big show on ITV in 1985 was Minder on the Orient Express, and it was sufficiently important and or hyped that TV Times again reeled someone in from the look-in offices downstairs to provide an artistic interpretation of the feature-length TV movie extravaganza. Ultimately, despite some truly deafening publicity, Minder got spanked in the ratings by the opposition's cover star. But at least Arthur and Terry provided a truly classic TV Times cover. In the mid-80s, Torvill and Dean were the second biggest couple in Britain. 2 years after their unprecedented 100% showing in Sarajevo, they, or rather another looking-style drawing of them, graced the front of the 1986 Christmas TV Times, along with some kind of gay Jack Frost and an incongruous but cheerful Dumbo. Sadly, that was the last time that the TV Times would look halfway classy at Christmas, and probably at other times as well. It spent the 80s steadily trundling Downmarket, giving more and more coverage to Corrie and Emmerdale, and for a couple of minutes in 1985 Albion Market, and introducing features like real-life stories, horoscopes, and even the odd knitting pattern, all of which suggested they'd given up the fight against Radio Times and were now aiming at the much softer target of the woman's realm market. In 1987, the cover of the Christmas TV Times was given over to Coronation Street, surprisingly enough for the first time, Pat Phoenix cameos notwithstanding. That was okay, quite charming, in fact, as it marked the departure of the iconic Hilda Ogden on Christmas Day itself. The decline first became apparent the following year. Once again, Minder was the cover story, this time in photographic form and sporting the Deregulation TV Times Santa suits. Unfortunately, they had to shout to be heard over a barrage of garishly coloured visual noise, promising features on a particularly soppy-faced Michael Crawford and 0898 competitions to win a car, a holiday, or a necklace with your sign of the Zodiac on it. Oh yes, and ITV and Channel 4 listings as well. The involvement of any ITV companies themselves in the making of TV Times was minimal by now and was drawing to a close. Within a few months, the magazine was sold to IPC, and the decade was seen out with Des O'Connor looking much the same as he had 20 years earlier, only browner, straining to be seen through an even more deafening cloud of noise. This aesthetic arguably peaked in 1990. This time it's Sally Dynevor and Helen Worth in the Santa suits on a white backdrop, straining to be made out amidst all the clip art, inset photos, shrieking banners, and sans serif fonts bellowing that you could win 10 grand with these random numbers. I don't want to come across as a middle-class snob, not least because I'm actually a pretentious member of the working class in disguise. But you can't really deny or indeed escape the magazine's aggressive, almost lascivious pursuit of the bottom end of the market by now. In 1991, things changed. The first massive BBC and satellite-equipped Christmas TV Times depicted the cast of the Darling Buds of May, for a change not in front of a white backdrop, and surrounded by marginally less noise than had become usual. The deregulation of TV listings have been on the card since at least IPC's takeover of TV Times. But with the passing of the Broadcasting Act 1990, it now had a date and time. March 1st, 1991. This deregulation meant the end of the TV and Radio Times' monopoly on the market. No longer did you have to buy both magazines every week. All your TV listings, BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and the exotic other worlds of satellite and cable, could be found in one or the other, or indeed one of the flood of almost indistinguishable new lightweight magazines with names like TV Quick, TV and Satellite Week, or the brutally utilitarian What's on TV. At the same time, women's magazines were undergoing a metamorphosis. The middle-class market had previously been the preserver to neuroses and knitting patterns monthlies such as Woman's Own and Family Circle. But by the early 90s, the more sophisticated and aspirational likes of Cosmopolitan and a relaunched Marie Claire had captured the imagination of the bourgeois housewife, and made the likes of Family Circle and Living look stuffy and strictly menopausal. The traditional magazines that didn't collapse altogether in the onslaught survived by finding a new market in the working class woman, who, if the resulting modern women's magazines are anything to go by, they apparently characterised as gossiping fishwives with a morbid interest in celebrity culture and, disturbingly, horrific real-life stories of perversity and suffering. What does this have to do with anything? I had a pound for every time I've heard that question. The main market for the radio and TV Times had traditionally always been female. Women with time on their hands between housewifely chores expected to plan the household's viewing along with the rest of their lives. Now the form of the TV listings magazine had been thrown open for anyone to use, and the obvious thing to do was to fuse it with that of the woman's magazine, and not the cosmopolitan Marie Claire end of the market, Radio Times could have those. But the mythical sociopathic fishwives interested in soap, celebrities and suffering, who may not even have existed until these magazines came along to create them. Soon the likes of TV Quick were prefacing the week's programming with stories about dead children and Alzheimer's, and the secret life of Bill Treacher. And without the backing of one of the main broadcasters, which allowed the Radio Times to emerge mostly unscathed, to survive, TV Times had to follow them down. The Larkins appearance in 1991 was the last time for a while that the Christmas TV Times would put a programme on its cover. The era of cheap greetings card covers began in 1992 with a generic snowman being pissed on by a cat, in a show of territorial defiance towards a dog. The logo also underwent a slight evolution, stumbling into a beveling machine and not writing itself in time, leaving it in italics for the rest of its life. 1993 saw the first appearance of a particularly disreputable-looking cartoon Father Christmas, driving what might have happened if they'd had Pimp My Ride in the 20s. The same slightly disturbing cartoon interpretation of the Fat Man appeared on the 1994 Christmas TV Times. Well, more accurately, they hired the same artist. This time, the worryingly drunk-looking Santa buzzes at a suburban home while DUI. Alcoholic Santa's final appearance came on the 1995 edition as a simple yet terribly disturbing close-up in three-quarter profile. After 3 in a row of that creep show, TV Times' next 3 years all feature photos of upcoming programmes, and all incongruously BBC programmes, which will never not look wrong to me. First up, Wallace and Gromit. They were everywhere Christmas 1995, with their newest short, A Close Shave, debuting on BBC Two that Christmas Eve, and the boys even taking the starring role in the channel's Christmas ident. Unfortunately for the TV Times, this was 1996, and the showing that year of A Close Shave, along with the 2 preceding shorts, was in fact a repeat. But it's the thought that counts. Phenomenon of 1997 was the Teletubbies. That's right, they're 20 years old. Deal with it. Notwithstanding a wintry backdrop, sparkles on the text, and of course the requisite snow on the logo, this isn't particularly Christmassy. But still more so than the 1970s one with Val and Max, so it's not as if modern life is rubbish. By 1998, the earliest sproutings of reality TV had arrived, to smash through in the ratings. The most popular non-fiction show of the year being Changing Rooms, a hybrid of game show, DIY, and Sunset Yellow FCF. So for the 3rd year in a row, TV Times had a BBC show on its Christmas cover. For the close of the decade, century and millennium, TV Times decided to at least fake being classy, with this genuinely rather splendid Had and Sundblom-esque depiction of the fat man at work. This essentially set the template for the entire rest of the future, with further Christmas editions of the TV Times almost always sporting a generic image of Mr. K. Kringle smiling beatifically, or creepily depending on the artist. After a while they become largely interchangeable. Apart from the occasional snowman or polar bear taking centre stage to keep things interesting, generic Santa has been king ever since, including this year. The TV Times still sells reasonably well, inasmuch as any magazine still sells in 2017. At last count, it was the 20th best-selling magazine in the country and the 4th most popular TV listings magazine. Radio Times is 3rd. Second and first, respectively, are the almost indistinguishable What's on TV and TV Choice, both featuring colossal fonts, garish colours, printed on tissue paper and sold for pennies. As indeed is the TV Times these days. The Radio Times had its identity as the official organ of the BBC, and its title of corporation helped it to hang on to that identity for grim death, even after deregulation and competition. The TV Times was already in the process of giving up its corporate tie to the ITV network and aiming for its patronising idea of the working class audience, when it was still, newspapers aside, the only game in town as far as ITV listings were concerned. The magazine as it exists today has a history, but not a legacy. The logo, introduced in 1981 and italicised 10 years later, is its only link to a time when it was still functionally distinguishable from the What's on TVs of this world. Well, that, and the fact that at Christmas it makes more effort than this. There may not be much more than TV Times in TV Times magazine anymore. At least they try.
I never knew there was so much in it.